New York's probably the most photographed city in the world, so I wanted to put my own twist in infrared. Now, for your convenience, I split up this video into 4 parts. I'm going to talk about my gear, the photos, my personal thoughts, and if you stick by to the end, how to edit an infrared photograph. For the camera, I'm using a full spectrum converted camera from Kolari Vision, but LifePixel also does it. Now, I'm using the Canon R, and I'm using the 24-105 lens in this case. Now, the great thing about infrared is you're probably going to be shooting at f8 and above because you're going to have to be shooting in the daytime. So the lens doesn't really matter, camera doesn't really matter either. But I've shot an APS-C for so long that I've always wanted a full frame camera to get the most out of my wide lenses. As for the photos, I think they speak for themselves. I spent 2 weeks in New York. I tried my best to visit as many different areas and districts as possible. But the thing about infrared is that you should shoot when there is plenty of sunlight. Now, Manhattan made that kind of difficult because there's so many skyscrapers, so many narrow alleys. So most of the time, the shadow was blocking the sunlight. You could still get some nice photos, but it was a little bit more challenging. Now, as for my thoughts on New York, I thought this was actually kind of challenging because as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, New York is one of the most photographed places in the world. Almost all the photos that I see from New York City look the same to me, and I don't blame them. Maybe if you come to New York, your style has to change a little bit. Like for myself, I consider myself more of a cityscape street photographer. I don't really care for people in my photos, I care more about the environment. But I felt that for New York, you have to be more of a person street photographer because there's just not that much variety. Especially in some place like Manhattan, pretty much all the blocks look the same to me. Now, like I know they're not all the same. For example, there's a big difference between Midtown and like Chinatown or something. But I can safely say I did not really enjoy shooting Manhattan as much as I thought I would, because all the blocks are kind of the same, all the buildings are mostly the same. And if you've been following me for a while, in my photography I don't like to include cars, but there's no way around them here. The places I did enjoy the most were actually anywhere else but Manhattan, namely Brooklyn. Like I really enjoy shooting Brooklyn, it had a lot more variety. So I think if you do go to New York, you're gonna have to change the way you photograph, especially if you're coming from Asia, such as myself, where I'm primarily a night photographer. And every street is just so different, but then you go to New York City and everything just kind of looks the same. Now, I don't mean that to diss New York. I love New York, but it just took me a while to get in the groove of shooting. As for the editing, I'm going to walk you through 2 photos that has an infrared filter. If you're using a regular camera with the R72 filter, or if you're using an infrared camera that's been converted to a specific wavelength, it's going to be different. And if you want a tutorial on that, I have videos right here in the description. But this is full spectrum camera. As you can see, the colors are not that different from how they look in the final form. What I did notice is that there is like a loss of contrast with the photos, and you might want to play around with the white balance. Personally, I liked it more as it was like this, slightly bluish. But since the contrast is lower, I'm gonna play around with levels like so. If you press J, you'll be able to see like these little red parts where highlights are overblown. And I like to do it just so there's a tiny bit of red, but not too much. And you get the same thing to the blacks. You slide it all the way, you get lots of blacks. So I want to make it so that there are some blacks, but not too many blacks. And this will give you much tonal range, I guess you can call it. But if you look at your histogram, you can see the difference. And then push J again so it can go away. And also when you shoot an infrared, your photos get a little bit softer because light bends differently, so it doesn't matter how sharp you try to take the photo, it's always going to be just a little bit soft. So I'm going to increase the sharpening. I'm not sure you can notice it here in the video, but I notice it. Now, regarding the settings, I usually just sit in aperture priority. Like, I don't really, maybe you watch many YouTube videos and they're like, oh, you gotta shoot manual, blah blah blah. It's a lot of BS, to be honest. Almost every photographer I know shoots aperture priority, but since it is the daytime, I was shooting at ISO 200. If your camera goes to 100, you can do that. And I was shooting at f11, and the camera chose the aperture. The camera chose the shutter speed by itself. So it's really up to you. This is one photo, and I'm gonna bring back a little bit more vibrance and possibly change the color a little bit. There we go. That looks a little bit much nicer. So let's choose a different picture. One thing I do want to add though is that when you're editing these infrared photos, they look much nicer if you include some kind of sky in the photo, because otherwise it's not going to look that different. I really enjoy shooting in Bushwick, so I'm going to choose one photo from there, and let's go for this one. So you can see it's got sky, it's got some pink trees, and that's usually what I like in my infrared photos. Reduce the highlights all the way, increase the shadows. You don't have to do this, it's kind of a preference, it's like an Asia thing, we like doing this. Press J, increase the whites, oh that's too much, and decrease the blacks, just so there's some blacks. Increase the vibrance a little bit, and maybe you can bring down the shadows if you want. It's up to you. And this is just my preference, but I like to kind of make the sky a little bit more natural, and of course make it sharper. 70, 1.5, 10, 30. You might be wondering why I use these numbers, 70, 1.5, 10, 30. It's just something I picked up when I was a landscape photographer, and I just applied it to my street photos to bring back a little bit of sharpness, but not too much. And as you can see, actually on this day it was a little bit cloudy, so I increased the ISO to 800, or maybe I just forgot to decrease it to 200. That could always be the case. F8, and we let the camera do its thing. So remember, I do have entire guides on infrared and full spectrum photography. You can find them in my channel and in the description.